Grief has a strange sound. It's not just the crying or the prayers or the choir that never quite hits the right note. It's the small noises that linger. The scrape of a chair, the shuffle of feet, the whisper of people who think they're being quiet but aren't. I heard all of it that morning. It was my wife's funeral. 43 years we'd been married. She'd been my first thought every morning and my last every night. And now there was just silence, the kind that gets under your skin. The church was crowded. Too crowded, if you asked me. Most of them were there for the appearance, not for her. I could see it in their eyes, scanning who else came, who wore what, who looked properly heartbroken. Grief, for some, is theater. I sat in the front row, hands folded over my cane, trying not to crumble. I wasn't a man who cried easily. Life had seen to that. But that day, I felt the ache all the way down to my bones. And then, in the middle of the pastor's eulogy, my son leaned over. He didn't whisper softly. He never learned how to lower his voice. His tone carried that casual arrogance that always set my teeth on edge. "Dad," he said, lips close to my ear, "now it's time to talk about the money." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. I turned my head slowly, expecting remorse or at least hesitation. But he just smiled. That same smug, impatient smile that had gotten him out of trouble since he was 10 years old. My wife's casket was right there, not even buried yet. I didn't say a word, didn't even blink. I just looked at him. And in that look, something inside me, something I didn't even know was still alive, shifted. He thought I was too broken to notice, too old, too weak, too lost in grief to care. But in that instant, I realized something very clearly. He had been waiting for this day. My son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd funded through 3 failed startups, the one my wife always defended, had been waiting for his mother to die so he could collect. The rest of the service blurred into noise. Voices came and went. People hugged me, offered empty condolences, said they'd call, said they'd visit. None of it registered. My eyes stayed on the casket until it disappeared from view, and I thought about the years that had led us here. My wife had warned me, once. "He's not like you," she'd said, years ago, when he'd demanded money for another business opportunity. "He's young," I'd told her. "He'll learn." He didn't. By the time we reached the gravesite, the November air had turned sharp and cold. The priest's words drifted past me, the sound muffled by the wind. I saw my son standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, impatient, tapping his shoe like he was waiting for a meeting to end. I wondered if he'd rehearsed it, that whisper, if he'd stood in front of a mirror and practiced the timing. When it was over, people began to leave. I stood there longer than I should have. The cemetery was quiet, except for the sound of dirt hitting the coffin. One of the workers looked at me with pity. I nodded to him, and then turned back toward my car. My son was waiting by the gate. "Dad," he said again, that same practiced calm. "We really should talk about Mom's will." I looked at him, my only child, my greatest pride and my deepest disappointment, and I finally spoke. "Not today," I said. My voice was steady, colder than I meant it to be. He shrugged. "Sure, but don't take too long, okay? These things, they get complicated." I watched him walk away, already on his phone, already planning. And in that moment, I understood something simple and final. I had lost my wife, but I wasn't going to lose my dignity too. I stood there, cane in hand, and made a quiet promise. He'd learn in time that I might have grown old, but I hadn't grown blind. And as I walked away from the grave, I already knew what I had to do next. I didn't go home right away after the funeral. Home wasn't home anymore. It felt like a house built out of echoes. Every chair had her shape, every cup her fingerprints, every room the smell of her perfume that would take months to fade. So I drove. Not fast, just far enough for the road to quiet my thoughts. The fields outside town were washed in that pale winter light that makes everything look older, even the sky. When I finally parked, I realized I'd pulled up outside my lawyer's office. Old habits. Whenever life cornered me, I went to someone who spoke the language of paper and signatures. Inside, Marlene looked up from her desk. We'd worked together for 20 years. She handled the kind of money that needed patience, not flash. Property deeds, trust papers, investment accounts. She rose when she saw my face. "I'm so sorry, Arthur." I nodded. "Thanks, I won't take long." She poured coffee without asking. I stood there, hands wrapped around the cup for warmth, and said quietly, "You still have a copy of Ellen's will, don't you?" "Of course," she said, opening a drawer. She slid the folder toward me. Neat, thick, complete. I remembered signing the last revision together 3 years ago when Ellen insisted we update it after her surgery. But as I skimmed the pages, I noticed something odd. At the back, stapled awkwardly, was a single sheet I didn't recognize. Typed recently, different font. A codicil, an amendment. Dated 8 months ago, Marlene murmured, frowning. "Was I present when she signed this?" I asked. "No. It says she met a notary at home. Looks official, but—" Her voice trailed off. We both stared at the page. In that codicil, a significant portion of her personal savings, nearly $400,000, was designated for our son. To support his growing business interests, it read. Ellen had never told me. And my son. He had never mentioned it either. The room felt colder. Marlene glanced up. "You think he persuaded her?" "I think he saw her kindness as weakness." We spent the next hour verifying dates, signatures, witnesses. Everything looked clean. Too clean. Whoever prepared it knew the system well enough to make it look legitimate. When I left the office, I didn't feel angry yet, just hollow. It wasn't about the money. It was about the silence. Ellen and I had shared everything. For her to hide something meant she'd been convinced by someone she trusted that it was necessary. My son had that talent. He could charm a lock open. Back at the house, the smell of lilies hit me. Funeral flowers. Neighbors had left food, cards. I couldn't stand it. I went straight to my study and pulled out the old file boxes. Bank statements, property records, trust ledgers. Numbers don't lie. They just wait to be noticed. It took 2 nights before the pattern appeared. Transfers, small at first, then larger. Consulting fees. Temporary loans. Each one authorized from an account Ellen had access to. Each one coinciding with the months she was in and out of hospitals, when she wasn't paying attention to paperwork. He'd been siphoning money long before she died, and he must have known that once she was gone, I'd find it. That's why he wanted to talk about the money before the dirt settled. He was afraid. I sat there in the dark, the monitor glow painting the room blue, and remembered the last serious talk Ellen and I had. She'd said, "Promise me you'll take care of him, even if he fails." I had promised, and now that promise was the sharpest knife of all. Around midnight I poured myself a drink and looked out the window at the empty street. I wasn't a violent man. I'd never been the type to shout. But betrayal has a quiet sound too. It's the click of a door closing behind someone you thought you knew. By morning I had a plan. Not for revenge yet, at least that's what I told myself, but for clarity. I called Marlene and asked her to arrange a private audit of every shared account. Quietly. No alerts sent to my son. Then I phoned an old friend of mine, Frank, who'd retired from the police force. "Frank," I said, "you still have contacts who can verify signatures." A pause. "I do. Why?" "Because I think my late wife's will was adjusted." He didn't ask more. Frank never did. He just said, "Send me what you have. I'll call in a favor." That day I finally walked into my son's house. He greeted me with a wide, performative smile, the kind meant for photographs. "Dad, good to see you. You look better." I looked around. Everything was new. The leather sofa, the artwork, even the car keys on the counter. Money had a smell, and it was all over him. We sat. He made small talk about investments, expansion, opportunities. Every word sounded like a pitch. I let him speak. When he paused, I said Ellen updated her will last year. He froze just long enough for me to notice. "Oh, I didn't know that. I figured you might." Our eyes met. For a second, the facade cracked. He shifted, laughed, poured more coffee. "You always think the worst of me, Dad." "No," I said softly. "I just stopped thinking the best." That line hit him harder than I expected. He looked away, jaw tight. I left soon after, pretending not to see the anger flickering behind his polite smile. Back home I called Frank again. He said, "Arthur, your hunch was right. The notary on that codicil doesn't exist. The witness signatures are copied. It's a fake." For a long time I said nothing. I just stared at Ellen's picture on the mantel. She'd trusted him. So had I. But that was the last day he would ever profit from either of us. I turned off the lights, sat at my desk, and began to draft a new document, my own will, rewritten from start to finish. And as the pen moved, slow and steady, I knew exactly what to do next. I didn't sleep that night. When dawn came, the light creeping through the curtains felt almost accusatory, like the morning itself wanted to know what I was going to do about my own blood lying to me. I made coffee, black and too strong, and read through every line of my new draft. No anger in the handwriting, just purpose. Revenge wasn't a word I let myself use. It sounded childish. What I wanted was correction. By 9, I was back in Marlene's office. She had already heard from Frank and looked at me as if the news might break me. It didn't. If anything, it steadied me. "Arthur," she said carefully, "we can challenge the codicil. It's fraud." "I know," I said, "but I don't want a court fight. I want something quieter, cleaner." I told her to pull the trust documents, the ones that governed everything Ellen and I had built over 4 decades. The house, the rental properties, the company shares, the pension accounts. We would transfer them, not destroy them. My wife's charities would get what she always intended. My employees would get their stock options. But my son, he would get exactly what he'd earned. Marlene hesitated. "You're cutting him out entirely. I'm giving him one last lesson." For the next week, I worked like a man half my age. I called bankers, accountants, old partners who still owed me favors. We restructured holdings, moved assets into charitable foundations, re-registered properties under trusts named for Ellen's maiden name so he wouldn't trace them easily. Every signature felt like a small exhale. Each document was a piece of armor sliding back into place. At night, I'd sit in Ellen's chair in the sunroom. The snow outside turned everything silver. I could almost hear her voice, gentle, teasing. "You're still trying to fix everyone, aren't you?" "Maybe, but some things deserved fixing." A few days later, I invited my son to lunch. Neutral Ground, a small Italian place we'd used for business meetings years ago. He arrived late, phone glued to his hand, grin rehearsed. "You wanted to talk," he said, sliding into the seat. "Yes," I answered. "About the future." He relaxed, assuming this was surrender. I watched him order the most expensive wine on the list, pretending he'd pay for it later. "I've been thinking about how to handle everything since your mother's passing," I began. He nodded, performing empathy. "Yeah, tough times. But you know she wanted things to go smoothly. I can help with the estate, take some of the stress off." I smiled faintly. "I've already handled it. The lawyers are wrapping it up. You'll get the paperwork soon." He paused mid-sip. "That fast? Yes, I thought you'd appreciate efficiency." The rest of the meal was small talk, but I could feel him trying to read me, searching for signs of weakness. He left before dessert, phone buzzing, a little too brisk in his goodbye. That evening I called Frank again. He'd traced where the missing funds had gone, through shell accounts into a startup registered under my son's girlfriend's name. They were planning to sell their tech company to investors who didn't realize the capital had been stolen from family accounts. "Want me to push it to the DA?" Frank asked. "Not yet," I said. "Let's see how he reacts when the ground moves under his feet." 2 days later, the movement began. The trust office froze the accounts. Property titles quietly updated on record. The business bank stopped transfers pending documentation review. I knew the calls would start within hours. They did. He called, voice sharp with practiced calm. "Dad, my bank says the trust is under review. What's going on?" "Routine," I said lightly. "You know how compliance works. But the funds." "I'm sure it'll be fine," I said, and hung up before he finished. The next day came 3 missed calls, then 5. By evening, he showed up at my door, face pale under the porch light. "You changed everything, didn't you?" "I protected your mother's legacy," I said evenly. "You can't do that. That money was never yours." For the first time since the funeral, he stopped talking. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. I could see the calculation dying in his eyes. I stepped aside. "Come in. We'll talk like family." Inside, the fire was going. I poured 2 whiskeys and let him sit across from me. He looked smaller than I remembered. Still the boy who wanted shortcuts. Still convinced charm was currency. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why freeze everything? I'm your son." "Exactly," I said. "And you thought that meant immunity." He shook his head. "You're ruining me." "No. I'm stopping you from ruining yourself. What you did to your mother's will could send you to prison." Frank found everything. His hands trembled. Frank, detective now retired, still knows his way around signatures. Silence filled the room. I set my glass down. "You have 2 options. I can take this to the authorities, or you can sign a release, Renounce your claim, walk away clean. The trust will cover your debts for 6 months. After that, you're on your own." He stared at me, eyes glassy, then at the fire. "You'd really cut me off." "I already did," I said quietly. "Now I'm giving you a chance to walk with a shred of dignity." He didn't speak again. He just signed, hand shaking, the pen leaving a faint smear on the paper. When he left, I followed him to the door. Outside, the snow had started again. Soft, relentless, covering everything equally. He didn't look back. I stood there long after his car lights disappeared. There was no triumph, just a slow easing in my chest. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed Ellen used to make, still half expecting her to walk in and scold me for staying up late. I looked at the documents stacked neatly on the nightstand. Trusts, deeds, the new will ready for filing. Correction, not revenge, but correction, when done right, can feel a lot like justice. The morning after he left, the house felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in, filling every room with memory. For the first time in weeks, I didn't wake up angry. I didn't check my phone for emails from lawyers or banks. I didn't replay old arguments in my head. I just sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Ellen used to read the paper, and listen to the kettle whistle. The snow outside was knee-deep now, the world blank and clean again. Funny, I thought, how snow can cover even the ugliest mess. I'd told myself what I did wasn't revenge, it was correction, a necessary line drawn after a lifetime of giving and forgiving. But sitting there watching the steam curl from my cup, I started to wonder if maybe there wasn't a little bit of both. That day, I met Marlene to finalize the filings. She was efficient as ever, though she studied me a bit too long before we began. "You okay?" she asked finally. "I'm fine." She tilted her head. "You don't look fine." "I'm finished," I said. "That's close enough." The new trust went into effect that afternoon. Ellen's charitable foundation was fully funded. Scholarships for medical students, care homes and art programs in the city she loved. The properties were deeded to the foundation as income sources. My employees each received their shares, per Ellen's last written wish. And my son? His name appeared nowhere, not even in the footnotes. Marlene hesitated before handing me the final copy. "You're sure? Completely?" She nodded and slid it across the desk. "Then it's done. Done." Such a simple word for something that took a lifetime to reach. On the drive home, I passed by the old park Ellen loved, the one with the wooden bridge where we'd first met. I pulled over and sat for a while, watching children throw snowballs. Their laughter drifted through the car window, cutting through the heavy quiet. That's when I realized peace doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from finally enforcing the lesson someone refused to learn. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Frank. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "Your boy's company, well, his girlfriend's company, collapsed. Investors pulled out after the fraud report." I leaned back in my chair. "Fraud report," he chuckled. "Public filing. Somebody dropped the evidence in the right inbox. Not sure who." I smiled faintly. The world has a way of balancing its books. Frank hesitated. "He's not taking it well. You want me to keep an eye on him?" "No," I said. "He needs to learn what it feels like when the safety net's gone." That evening, as I locked up, I saw headlights pause outside the gate. For a second, I thought it might be him, but the car didn't turn in. It waited, then drove off slowly. I didn't chase. Sometimes, distance is the only way left to love someone. The seasons turned fast after that. Winter gave way to a shy spring. The snow shrinking into muddy rivulets, the garden coming back to life in patches of color. I started tending it again, hands deep in soil. It felt good, something living, something that didn't ask for anything but care. One morning I found an envelope on my doorstep. No name, just my address written in an unsteady hand. Inside was a short letter. "Dad, I don't expect forgiveness. I thought money could fix things. It never did. I'm trying to start over somewhere small. I'll make it right someday. Michael." I stood there for a long time, the paper shaking slightly in my hand. I didn't know where he was. I didn't need to. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in Ellen's old jewelry box, beside our wedding photo. She'd told me once, you can't raise a man by shielding him from the consequences of his own character. Maybe. Finally, I'd listened. Months later, at the unveiling of Ellen's memorial wing at the hospital, I stood before a crowd of doctors, nurses, and students. Her name gleamed on the marble wall, the Ellen Whitmore Foundation for Compassionate Care. I spoke briefly, nothing dramatic, just words about her kindness, her stubbornness, her belief that doing good didn't require applause. When the crowd clapped, I looked up at the ceiling lights and imagined her smiling at the fuss she'd always pretended to hate. As I stepped off the stage, a young nurse caught my arm. "Sir," she said softly, "thank you for what you've done. My scholarship came from your wife's fund. I'll never forget it." That, more than anything, felt like the real inheritance. Not the money, not the houses, but the quiet good that would outlive both of us. That night I sat in the garden again, glass of whiskey beside me, watching the stars blink above the tray line. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to end. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't arrive like thunder. It just settles. And when it does, you finally understand. Justice isn't about making someone hurt. It's about restoring the balance they disturbed. The will was filed, the legacy secured, and my son, wherever he was, would have to rebuild himself, not on inheritance but on humility. Ellen would have approved.